Okay, welcome back. Episode 6, the Investigative Truth Cold Case Missing. And I'm going to continue on with Taj's story. So I've covered a lot of different stuff. Outside of that, a lot of things about cold case investigations, unresolved investigations, why a case can go cold and why things stop, how we manage those cases, the differences between investigations 40 years ago to investigations current. And I know I've mentioned we're trying to stay positive when you're on these sites. Don't be so judgmental or assume that things have not happened. And I also do want to say that I so appreciate people who are web sleuths, self-proclaimed or otherwise, that jump into these cases, that dig, find out everything that they can find out. They are kind of gems, hidden gems, really, when it comes to investigations and how we look at them. At least I think that. I know that is not the way it is for everybody, but I appreciate them. However, with that being said, sometimes there's also problems with these different sites that will put information out there that's simply not true, or put something as an assumption or an opinion, but make it appear as if it's fact. And that's actually kind of sometimes how cold cases end up. There's a lot of things that were looked at, may have been opinions, may have been just people being biased. And again, when I talk about this, I don't always talk about just Taj's case. This is many different cases. If you haven't figured out by now too, I enjoy getting out and getting some exercise, even if I appear winded when I'm out doing it. So we know that Annette woke up the next morning, March 31st, 1981, and Taj was nowhere to be found. She made some calls, spoke to some people, called her mother. No one knew where Taj was. He was not at the bus stop. He had not made his way to school. She called the police station and called Clarence at Tractor Trailer Training School out towards Boston. He said he was on his way home. He'd find a way home. He had gone there out that way by car with another Leominster resident who was driving, and asked her not to call the police. They could look for him when he got home, but she had already called. Together, they went to Fallbrook School. They inquired with administration there and learned that he was not at school. He was nowhere in the school. And they did not know where he was. But while there, Clarence left with their car to go look for Taj on his own. He returned sometime later, picked up Annette, and during the day they continued to try to find out where Taj was. You know, the days and weeks that followed, I've mentioned there was not a newspaper article for 5 days. Missing child posters weren't put up for at least that long. Any real searches began, but not to the extent that they should have. He was deemed a runaway. There's a lot of information about the back and forth between the Narbonne family and the police department. Like I said, missing children were looked at differently back then. Kind of odd, but for those of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s, we were oftentimes out during the day. Our parents didn't know where we were. We were out trying to stay out of trouble, but we were outside on our bikes. Yeah, you know, some of us had boundaries, some of us didn't. We probably always went beyond them. Across the railroad tracks, if you grew up in my neighborhood, was a no-no, but we did it all the time. So, child missing was just not like it is today. Were the threats out there, were different things present then, just as they are now? Absolutely. But reports weren't taken right away. And in Taj's case, you know, a call to the police station in the early morning, I think it was before 8 o'clock, you know, resulted in a report taken at 5 o'clock. Again, not uncommon. You can scream and yell, you can type in large caps. That was how it was. And you can't say now, well, that was wrong, because at the time it was right. It doesn't make it right, but that's what was right at the time. We weren't up to speed on different things regarding missing kids or investigations or stuff like that. So, and it's pretty interesting because even the late 70s, early 80s, we experienced a lot of missing kids in Massachusetts and New England. But things remain the same, just as they did for driving under the influence, just like they did for domestic abuse and all of that stuff. So the first newspaper article did not print for at least 5 days. Posters didn't go up for at least 5 days. And the family, through documentation, wanted to do more, wanted to put things out, post things. And for whatever reason, the police department at the time did not want them doing that. Again, that's documented, not something that I'm just coming up while I talk. They offered a reward. Some of those old flyers, that reward is still on there. I think it's $2,500. That reward is long gone. It no longer stands. That was back in 1981, 82, 83. So, you know, that week goes by and nothing is happening. There's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of speculation. Again, report wasn't taken till 5. So did police go into his apartment? Did they look for anything? Did they collect anything? Other than interviews and whatnot, was anything done to collect evidence? There is nothing that says that there was, because again, it was considered a runaway. There was a note that has been published before. I can't quote the note, but I can paraphrase that it says, I don't want to be here, or I don't want to listen to anyone anymore, I'm leaving, something to that effect. It is unknown when that note was written. There's nothing that says that that note was written on March 30th, the night Taj returned home. There's nothing that says it was written March 31st, early morning hours, when he was reported missing. The family paid for a handwriting expert to look at that note and see whose writing it was, and it did in fact come back to Taj. Again, with no other indication of time or anything like that. Also, as we know, I believe the temperature was about 29 degrees out. The wind chill was up to, or the wind was up to 28 miles an hour or so, the gusts, which would then have a wind chill possibly around 20 degrees or less. Depends what you're looking at for weather history, but it's right in there. He didn't take any clothes with him. He didn't take a winter jacket or gloves or anything like that. He was scared of the dark. So, did he leave on his own out the door to run away? Or did he leave that apartment with assistance in one way or the other? We can speculate. I can't go into evidence, obviously, leading in one direction or the other. Even when I talk about various things in these videos and I'm explaining cold cases, like I said, I'm not always necessarily talking about Taj's case. But makes you wonder. The weeks and months, again, was really a back and forth of where is Taj Narbonne. There were searches that were done in the area, ground searches. They did not have the technology or the methods that are out there today. I have spoken to several of those people who did searches. They were Leominster Civil Defense volunteers, great people, great organization, Leominster Emergency Management now. They did searches in the woods out there. The conditions at times were not great, whether they were hot or muggy or rainy, which always leaves on the table the human element of searching. And we've learned that lesson in many searches in Massachusetts alone, that even though you walk through an area manually searching it, you're not always guaranteed a result, even though there is something there. But those searches were done. I spoke to several of those people that were involved in them in various areas of Leominster. Those areas since that time have been searched again. They may be searched again. That's part of doing these cases and making sure that every single aspect of everything is covered. During that year of 1981, initially Annette stayed with Clarence. She gave birth to their child not long after Taj went missing. But at some point, Annette left Clarence, left him for good. He was eventually, because they were still involved with Kingdom Hall Jehovah's Witnesses, he was what they called then disfellowshipped. They don't call that anymore. They don't call that anymore. They just changed it last year, I believe. So, a series of events happened during the year, but Annette found herself in hiding. It was still believed that she possibly was hiding Taj. There has never been anything to say that she has. No evidence to that at all. But that was the investigative path at the time. But it was about November, December of 1981, Clarence realized that she was back in town. He realized that through something that he was the mastermind of, and created a scenario to find out if she was local or not. That he acknowledges. And he kidnapped her for several days. Again, public information because a trial took place and he was sentenced for that. So a whole lot of things happened in 1981. The only thing that did not happen was that Taj was located, or really any substantial information had come forward. Months went by, years went by. There has been information here and there that came forward, and certain searches were done with no new information from those searches, nothing related to the case. So it continued on. And as I've said, I appreciate all the people that have touched this case and what they've put in this case, especially those that began the case at the very beginning and put so much time into it as best that they could and as best anyone has been able to. That includes me, because I would think after 22 years, I would have had an answer. I think that we're closer. I think that as long as it stays out in the public, that's what matters. Someone commented the other day, speaking of comments, I'm big on comments, and someone says, these cases just kind of, come into the spotlight and then go away again. Well, that's what happens when a case is unresolved. You can't put information up every week. Sometimes you can't put information up every month because you lose people. When you are repetitive with something, you'll begin to lose people. If my page is all about, my channel is all about Taj Narbonne, if my Facebook Aubuchon Investigations page is all about Taj Narbonne, and people don't want to hear about Taj Narbonne anymore because there's no new information, then they unfollow me. Just like they do with any other site. Or people that are, and I have said this to some people that I know, when you manage a page and you just have no control over comments, if it's constant bashing of law enforcement or bashing of family, and Annette has received plenty of bashing in this case. It's not really necessary to do that, but people do that. People will bash and assume and all of that stuff. But the problem is that when you have sincere followers on these pages that go on to read the information and read about a case and are serious about this stuff, when it comes to comments and when it comes to how the page is managed, you'll quickly turn people away. I am retired law enforcement. I am a private investigator. I have a passion for cold cases. You know, in my personal life, I get questioned quite often about why I put the time in that I do for Taj Narbonne. Well, all you have to do is talk to relatives and talk to friends and realize that there are a lot of people out there that are waiting for an answer. So I do get that criticism. People have told me I'll die without an answer. Well, so be it, as long as somebody else behind me knows the information that I have. I don't think that way. I'm not looking for a person's criticism. I'm looking for their positivity, that these cases matter. Because if someone's child went missing, in today's world, and the police investigation slowed down, and someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Would you take a look?" Well, I absolutely would. Because I give a shit. That's why. And it takes a certain type of person in these cases to actually give a shit and to follow up with what they started and continue on. So, but anyway, lost my place there. But anyway, when it comes to these pages, you know, you'll lose people if you don't manage them. You lose people if you're an administrator and you're trashing the police, or you're always posting stuff that's negative. I just stopped following those pages, which kind of is really a shame, because pages like that need a person like me to take interest in them and maybe send a message or ask a question on various cases. And, you know, I think when you're surrounded on those pages by just negative stuff, and factual stuff has kind of gone down the wrong path, then you'll turn away from it. So, but whatever. So in 2003, we began the reinvestigation, myself and Rick Gallant, who I was a detective with. We worked with the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, two incredible investigators. And we began from scratch. We began from 15 Naples Street, months prior to Taj's disappearance, and we went from there. We learned a lot, even prior to March 31st of 1981. We learned a lot about what was going on in the home, outside of the home, how he felt in the scenario that was happening in his life. Again, he was surrounded by love. I cannot say that enough. Taj Narbonne was a loved kid. He just was not loved by his stepfather, and he did not like his stepfather at all. And if there was any type of discipline that came within his home, it came from his stepfather. But his mother loved him incredibly, his grandparents, his friends. I said that before. Trying to set that stage that this was a kid who was just, he'd laugh, he had good friends. You know, I know who they are. I've talked to them. And he was just in a really crappy situation. But we went back, we started at 15 Naples Street, and we went from there. One of the first people we talked to was their old landlord, who still lived at 15 Naples Street, Mr. Ciccone. Old Italian guy. Had a personality to him, could be loud. Sat down with him, and Mr. Ciccone said, "Wow, you guys finally showed up to talk to me." I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "I've never been spoken to." I didn't doubt that, because there was no information that he had been spoken to. So we continued with our interview of him, which was probably one of the strongest interviews that the reinvestigation produced. There have been other very strong interviews, but this one was incredible because he provided information that was unknown to us. He provided information that eliminated locations, eliminated scenarios, eliminated a lot of belief of a certain element of the case that was believed to be factual. And when we walked out of there, and he also explained to us conversations that he had had with various people. He explained how he was missing different things from his home, things that he noticed right away, and had passed this information on and wanted to speak with someone, but he was one of those interviews that just kind of got lost. But we walked out of there realizing that the various elements of the case that we believed were factual, meaning investigators for years believed were factual, were in fact not. Of course, I, again, cannot go into that stuff. That gets back to the integrity of the case and not ruining it. But he was an incredible, incredible witness. And we continued on. We continued on with the march. We spoke to people that were children at that time from different neighborhoods. We spoke with different people that were friends with the family, members of the Jehovah's Witnesses, etc. And really got a true glimpse of life in 1980 and 1981 for not only Taj, but his mother, the home, and everyone around it. No information is ever too small, I suppose. Every piece of information is important. I learned that last year when, because of Facebook, someone reached out to me and wanted to talk about things that had happened prior to Taj's disappearance. This person did not feel like what they had to say would matter or would be helpful. And the second best interview that was probably ever done in this case in the 22 years I had it, the first being Mr. Ciccone, the landlord, was this person who really set the tone for behind the scenes things that were happening. Are they related directly to his disappearance? Absolutely not. Do they have a part in the investigation? They absolutely do. And it kind of resets your vision when you talk to witnesses 43 years later that produce the information that they do that has never been brought up in the case before. And from that interview, I had several other interviews who were kind of, each one of them was basically off on a different path, but again, relayed the scenario of what was going on. So important. Taj Narbonne's case is not a cold case. It is active. Every year, on March 31st, I call and talk to his mother, Annette. We have had some tough conversations. We have had some good conversations. But I can tell you that they all matter one way or the other. So in episode 7, I hope you join me, and I'm going to keep on talking about Taj's case and maybe bring you up to speed a little bit on what's going on. Thank you for supporting me. See you soon.